Welcome to the MSDW podcast. I'm Jason Gumpert, editor at MS Dynamics World. On this episode, we are using API automation as an entry point into a bigger story: how finance leaders are becoming cybersecurity leaders. This episode is sponsored by SignUp Software, and my guests, Rob Ashe of SignUp and Gabe Garcia of Eftsure, discuss their company's strategic partnership, what it means for Dynamics 365 finance and operations users, and the role of financial automation in fortifying against modern threats. Throughout this discussion, Rob and Gabe share insights from the new 2025 Cybersecurity Guide for CFOs, and we'll tell you more about how to get that report later. We also dive into why today's fraud landscape demands adversarial thinking, how practices like red teaming are reshaping finance functions, and what it takes for CFOs to lead their organizations toward greater digital resilience. All right, I am here with Rob Ashe and Gabe Garcia. Really looking forward to today's conversation. Welcome to you both. Rob, can we maybe just start with you? Can you give our listeners a sense of your role at SignUp Software and your focus in the North American market?
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Jason. And thanks for having me back. So my name is Rob Ashe. I'm the Vice President of North America for SignUp Software. So I'm responsible for everything with our enterprise team. So I really focus on the sales, customer service, and consulting delivery for our enterprise customers across the different portfolios that we have within our organization. So I've been with the SignUp Software coming up on a year. And prior to that, I was in the channel with large partner Avanade. And then I was also at Microsoft there for a better part of 13 years.
All right, great. It's good to have you back. So Gabe, welcome to you as well. Great to have you on the podcast. Can you tell us a little more about Efture's mission and your role?
Thank you, Jason. Yes. So I lead our partnership division at Eftsure. The mission is simple. So we ensure businesses pay the right people. So our SaaS platform provides real-time verification of business entities native within Dynamics D365. So we're removing the stress and pain away from the finance team and taking the responsibility to automate, validate, and guarantee you're paying the right person.
All right, excellent. And I mean, this episode is really to learn a bit more about the partnership between your teams. Maybe we could just start with a bit more on what sparked this partnership. What problems are you trying to solve?
I can go ahead and start. I think the finance team has the largest target on their back for cyber criminals. And the intersection between finance and cybersecurity is becoming more and more important. And I think Rob and I both solve and saw the same pain point, right? Automating and protecting finance functions and controls within D365. So this integration brings the best of both worlds, one seamless workflow. So invoices flow from Xflow directly into our validation layer, all within inside F&O. So that means no exporting data, no switching apps, no risk of human error. And, this is the next evolution of finance security and automation.
Yeah, really interesting. Rob, is there anything you want to add?
When I think about the partnership, it's really just kind of creating a seamless value chain for the end user and someone who's a finance professional. How do we make it as easy as possible to automate their processes and keep them as secure as possible? Because every single touch point within anything external is a potential threat vector for them, both from a technological perspective, but it's also from a social perspective. You think about, we'll talk today some of the examples of ways that there's social engineering and other ways that, bad actors are trying to infiltrate the finance department in order to extract either information or actual money. And the ways that we can show with our partnership keeping that as seamless as possible so that, one, it's a great user experience, but it's also a lot more secure and it helps mitigate risk, which is one of the core accountabilities for the finance department.
Yeah, and I have to say, this will be a bit of a learning experience for me too, because I'm certainly familiar with the concept of the risk of fraud as it relates to AP and in the finance department and some of the sort of fundamental sort of workflow and approval steps that any sort of good AP automation process or technology enables. But this is really another level, and I think we're going to get into that here. Gabe, yeah, on your side, your firm has a new cybersecurity guide that is trying to kind of guide finance leaders. What are some of the mindset shifts, and what is your team really trying to communicate to finance professionals with that new report?
Well, I think that's the key term, is the mindset shift, right? And kind of like I said, there's no department that's more attracted to these cyber criminals than the finance team. And Now with AI, the sophistication level is increasing day by day, and it's pretty scary. They know the entire finance team. They leverage a lot of the same data that we do from enriching their data from Zoom Info. So they have pictures of the finance leaders, they have descriptions, they have strategies, and they have engagement scores. So not only do they know all of your team members, but they understand your tech stack, they understand your workflows and approval thresholds. So, really in order to beat them, you got to think like them. And, you got to look at your own process through their eyes. So really what that means is testing where and how they would attack you. So that would be, through vendor changes, you can unauthorized payment attempts, bank detail updates. You really, from a finance perspective, need to check all your entry points.
Yeah, Rob, let me put this to you from a D365 perspective. In those environments, how are finance and AP teams vulnerable to AI-enhanced attacks or other kinds of invoice fraud?
Yeah, I mean, especially with, the last 3 years with generative AI, criminals have access to really, really powerful tools to be able to create things like fake invoices. Something that's super simple where you can say, hey, you can put in a simple prompt within a publicly available generative AI tool and then be able to create what looks like a very compelling invoice. So you think about it like, okay, well, as long as if you've got a document that's kind of the core thing that people look at when you're going through, you think about it from an approval standpoint, you see an invoice come in from the AP system, you check it over for, certain pieces of information, depending on what your process might be. And if it looks compelling, unless you have some other formalized processes and checks and balances in there, you might just, and you've got dozens or hundreds of those in your queue that you've got to be able to go through if you're an enterprise company. You're thinking more about efficiency than security in most cases. And if it's compelling enough, it can, it's just like a piece of counterfeit currency. Unless you've got the little marker, if you're a cashier and you've got the marker to be able to go over the $100 bill to tell whether or not it's fake, if it looks like a $100 bill, it's a $100 bill as far as you can tell. And so being able to validate those other pieces of information within your system and then have those additional processes to check to make sure that the payment sources are valid, that the suppliers are, especially if they're new suppliers, are they the legitimate organization? Does everything line up? Is all of their information correct? If you guys, you see any phishing attempts or anything, this is something that's been for me with this role, I get phishing attempts all the time now. And so I'm starting to get a little bit more savvy when organizations are reaching out to me. I just got one this weekend that was pretty compelling looking, and it looked like an employee survey that was done internally. But if you looked a little bit closer, you're like, wait, that email address isn't quite right, or that the information that for our logo didn't look quite right. And it turns out it was a phishing attempt. So it's like you get a little bit smarter to those things over time, but we want to try and formalize as much of that into the system itself so that we remove that human error potential.
Yeah, there are now, risks from deepfakes, spoofing, voice manipulation. Gabe, let me bring you in on this. Can you talk about those kinds of fraud attempts or others that you're seeing?
Yes. And just to add to Rob's, because he hit the nail on the head, the other thing I think people don't think about is it's not just your system and your network, right? It could be your 10,000 vendors that does get hacked, right? So that's a real email address coming from the vendor that you've known for 10 to 20 years. Nothing is going to look suspicious from it, and they're going to ask to change banking details. So you really have to understand how sophisticated they are. Now, I think we've all seen the deep fakes as well. They got spoofed emails. We have voice cloning. So they're creating, fake execs to fake vendors to fake urgency. I'll give you an example. Arab Engineering out of the UK, they got deep faked. They acted as the CFO and other internal leaders and faked a couple finance team members to send 25 million over 15 transactions. So a very, very large hit that, can really cripple a business. And, I think we're really at the tip of the iceberg right now with AI. Going to the DynamicsCon conference, everything was about AI agents. And we're seeing now that some of these cyber criminals can start leveraging that technology as well, where they're, building an army of agents, right? Because it's a numbers game on how they get in. So, with these agents, they have memory, they have reasoning, and they can leverage tools. So we are at a very, very scary point. And I think businesses need to figure out the best way, especially on the finance side, of how they can protect their business.
Yeah, and the just the variations, the permutations of all these different agents working together in combination with each other across different systems. I mean, it's really kind of a dizzying array of possibilities, I would say. Is that one of the ways that your team is maybe concerned about what's to come?
Yeah, I think our team's always looking at, okay, well, what's next, right? And agents are coming, they're already leveraging them. But, what we really want to get scared on this podcast is agentic AI, right? Where these AI systems operate autonomously, they're making decisions and they're, achieving actions with minimal human intervention. So I would think of them almost as a, shapeshifter, right? Where they're figuring out ways to get in and they're taking on personas, and then they sit within your system and they hide. And then once they are able to kind of find your data, your financial controls, they begin exploiting and weaponizing that for financial gain. So, I think we're at just the breaking point of this really starting to happen. And I think, we all need to take a better look at how we're protecting our business.
Yeah, I mean, a huge challenge, a huge issue for everyone to be watching right now. Rob, when it comes to AP automation specifically, what is its role in reducing some of these risks?
When I think about this, as much as we've got really, there's so much access to really powerful tools for the organizations, they really have to formalize their process. And if you're like many of our customers, they're either coming from a very analog type of environment where they have either paper invoices that get scanned or emailed PDF invoices that then have to get input into their system. And they're usually looking for their first version of an OCR or optical character recognition type of tool to be able to scan those invoices and then map the information from those invoices into the correct fields within their ERP system and Dynamics in particular, so that then you're not having to key in those individual things. If you're keying in information, those are opportunities for potential human error and things you have to go back in and fix. But then that process, if it goes from one person to the next set of approvals, every time somebody in that process has to do something on their own, there's two sides of the coin. There's a mistake that can occur, but then there's also a mistake that can get caught. So that's part of having the human intervention within any sort of process. There can be good things that happen that are easier, and then there's bad things that you can catch or not catch. And for us, when we're talking through this with clients, we want to make sure that we're not only helping them automate their processes, but improve those processes in the first place. Because if you just automate a bad process, it's still a bad process, just faster. And what we're trying to do is make sure that we're leveraging the experience of our teams and the hundreds of clients that we're working with. And many of the folks that are on our team are ex-customers that have actually gone through and not only selected these kinds of tools, but used them and administered them in their own companies in previous roles. So leveraging that experience for an organization where this is the first time that they're doing this. And I think sometimes the mistake for especially people that are in tech is they overestimate the maturity of the organizations that they're working with. Because if we're spending all day, every day talking about AP, it's the most important thing to our company. But if this is the first time you're doing this and it's one chapter of a long story in your ERP migration, you're trying to get through that project and you're trying to, control costs and make sure that you're improving something on your scorecard. And anything we can do to help advise that process and make it easier for them, but also help them see around corners and control and mitigate risk so that we can say, hey, you really want to focus on this because 6 months down the road, you might have this problem. Or hey, you're thinking about this in phase one in this company. Like I'm working with a client right now. They're planning on doing nearly 15 countries, and each one of them have interesting locality kind of requirements and regulations. And, they're operating in different parts of the world that have different policies that they have to maintain. So that kind of complexity, you need help. And that's where, us at SignUp Software and Gabe and his team at Eftsure, we're hyper specialists on the areas that we focus on. And so we try to bring that advisory role, not just to, bring some new software into their organization, but also help them improve their processes so that not only are they getting the value out of it, but they're also seeing around those corners and protecting from what's next because we're spending all day, every day working on this.
All right, great. Yeah. And Gabe, let me bring you back into this. So like from the Eftsure perspective, how does your platform help with some of these challenges?
Well, I think that's why we created this integration with SignUp and, Xflow, because, now that automation goes directly into our validation layer, right? So I think with this integration, we can stop the human errors. But I think most importantly too is I can stop the threat at the moment of payment, right? Where that's really the most vulnerability is when once they're in your system, we kind of know that they're already getting in. There's 9 trillion in cyber criminal fraud across the globe. So if we can stop the AP team from submitting payment in real time, we can stop the bleeding at that payment source. So I think that's why it's so important to be native within D365 and not be, a portal, is because we can now alert the AP team so that they know this is an account that they cannot pay and that they need to re-verify with us, and we can blacklist them so that no other organization is going to pay this fraudster. And I think that's just a very, very important piece because, the AP team is not well versed in the sophistication level of these fraudsters. And, they haven't been trained to understand what they're capable of. So, we alleviate that pain and say, hey, we will take it upon ourselves to do the due diligence, risk assessment, and to validate each of these business entities and to guarantee that you're paying the right person on the other side of the fence.
Yeah. And I'm not sure who this question is for, but it kind of, to me, from what you're both describing, it changes the idea or the concept of what kind of automation you're really trying to deliver to end customers. Maybe Rob, I'll start with you. I mean, it sounds like this is an evolving story of what customers should be thinking about, your end customers. I mean, Dynamics 365 customers, for example.
Yeah, and that's the thing too. It's as we're exploring with the partnership and where our customers can really validate where they're getting that experience and where they're seeing that value, where they go, "Oh wow, we hadn't thought about this." That's one of the interesting things, especially for us. Within North America, our customer base, we're spending significant amount of time working directly with our end customers to help understand how they're utilizing our solutions now, because we're in an interesting point as a company where we're continuing to have significant investment from our private equity ownership group on expanding our portfolio and going into other rooms of the house from a business perspective with the different ISV solutions that we're starting to acquire. And how do those value chains start to emerge? Because one thing that when you're working within the private equity space is you have an idea of where you think the value is, but sometimes the customer can actually bring things that you hadn't understood as being really important to the table. And then that can change your strategy over time. So we have things that logically seem to make sense where we look at the value chain, pre-posting for AP, and we say, okay, this is what the invoice process, this is what our core Xflow product does. These are the value drivers within this space to help improve efficiency, to mitigate risk, to really help maximize headcount spend and where they're spending their time. And then once we get that approval, we kind of hand the baton off to the team over at Eftsure so that they can go through their process and seeing the potential that our customers are coming back and saying, oh, this actually highlights an issue in our process that we can go and fix. And now you have a lot more pass-through potential, which that's where customers, when, some of the clients that we're working with, they're doing, 2, 3, 4, 500,000 invoices per year. So any possible improvement they can have in their process or mitigating that risk is something that has an immediate return for the growth of that company. But it takes time. And, we've got to be able to have a much closer relationship with our customer, not just within the kind of narrow focus of a single application or a single process, but expanding that across the rest of really the payment lifecycle and the invoice lifecycle outside of what we normally would just focus on with Xflow. And that's a pretty exciting thing because our customers, they get to experience all of that value when we have really strong partnerships with other organizations and we're thinking through things that they haven't encountered yet before. It just gives them a much better experience and they get a lot more value out of that, immediately.
Great. Gabe, anything you wanted to add on that point?
Well, I think that just, with SignUp Software adding all of these pieces, that's also crucial for us too, because these are missing gaps for us, right? And that's why we created this partnership, was that we could be better together. And I think as everything is becoming more and more digitized, and now you have instant payments as well. And I heard someone once say, instant payments leads to instant fraud. So the time to react, detect, and stop this fraud is dramatically shortened. So fraudsters are taking advantage of this. So by adding all of these layers together, we are better, right? And we provide a better solution. And so that's why it's great to hear that all these pieces are being added, and that makes us, I think, more bulletproof as we move forward.
All right. I wanted to bring up another concept that honestly I hadn't heard much in the context of business applications before this year or last year or so, and that's red teaming. What does it look like in finance, Gabe?
Yes. So it's somewhat of a strange term, right? Red teaming, and there's pressure testing. So red teaming it's almost simulating a full scale assault on an organization, right? So you're going at multiple facets and systems of the company. So an example would be, we start with the phishing attacks. You would then look at hitting their network and trying to find some type of compromise. You could create rogue employees. You could change vendor data. You're just trying to simulate as many different real world attempts throughout, pretty much every single entry point. And then from a pressure testing perspective, I think that's a little more focused attack. So that's kind of more going after one system, right? To try to see if you can find any flaws. So, an example would be, a duplicate invoice, right? You just have a slight variation. Maybe you change a decimal. And so you're trying to find ways that you could penetrate your own system. So again, that also could be a vendor email change. So that's why, SignUp Software with Eftsure together solves both of those problems. You're able to stop any of those, invoice manipulation, as well as any of the vendor and banking detail changes.
And Rob, are customers asking for more cybersecurity resilience features in their ERP workflows today?
So we have been seeing it a little bit more because of some pursuits that we've had in North America that were in the kind of government contracting space. And we noticed that there was a lot more focus on just the overall security posture and, hey, how does SignUp Software do this? Especially things like ISO certifications, and just a lot more due diligence that was required than we had seen in other pursuits that we had. And then it started to come up more and more outside of just the defense contracting, where you would expect higher levels of security questions. And then we started to see it more in our core manufacturing base and within our professional services base. So it started as a trickle, and now we're seeing it in just about every opportunity where we have a much deeper security review in the context of their ERP architecture and expanding into their data architecture as well. So it was something that we've been spending a lot of time as an organization at the corporate level to be able to provide a lot more of this information to our partners, especially as we're going in through large RFP pursuits where there's so much information that needs to be provided, and it really helps our teams prepare and respond for those things when we've got a lot more information that we can hand over. And again, it's a value add for us when we can provide more information than asked for, because it can help maybe ask questions that hadn't been thought of yet. So we started to see it a lot more, but especially as you're looking at organizations that they're trying to get started with AI, or they're trying to see, hey, we see some use cases, but we need to go from 0 to 1. What do we need to do? And whether you're talking about Power Platform, or you're talking about, building your first agent or something like that, it starts with the foundational elements of security and data governance and data fidelity, and making sure that you have all of those things thought about and considered and kind of planned for before you start opening up Pandora's box with giving people really cool tools. Because otherwise you usually find out the hard way that there's a security issue, or there's potential privacy concerns with information, or you've got someone who is really excited about using ChatGPT, and they put sensitive information up in there, not realizing the technology actually is assimilating that information back into their models. So there's the training element, there's the planning element. And fortunately for us, we've been, again, just staying really close to our customers and trying to figure out, okay, what's the best way for us to be able to, one, respond for these questions and prepare for them? And then how do we make sure that our partnerships and the other organizations that we're working with, that we're all aligned and that we're, greater than the sum of our parts kind of thing. And this is a great example of that.
All right. Yeah. And maybe building on some of the points you were just making when it comes to actually, I guess, improving the culture of security inside organizations. As you talk to leaders in organizations, how do they empower their finance teams to be aware, I guess, and report security risks, report their suspicions to sort of bring that culture more into the organization?
I think it's a really simple thing. It's if you see something, say something. If it doesn't look right, report it. Even just out of just a simple sense of being cautious, and when I was working with security solutions, when I was at Microsoft, that was the same thing that I saw from the most successful CISOs, is creating an open culture where if there's a potential concern, you're thinking about what's best for the company. And even if it's something within your work group, it's similar to if you've got somebody who's a whistleblower, you want to protect those people because ultimately it makes the organization better and it provides better value for their customers. And I think just starting there and encouraging people to try and, find where there's potential issues or think outside of the box so that they can have, better confidence in new things that they're trying or old systems that they just assume are good, but nobody's gone through and checked. I think that's really the most critical thing that I've seen.
Yeah, Gabe, let me ask you to sort of weigh in on the same theme here.
I think Rob hit it on the head with saying that just personally look how often you're getting these kind of spoofed texts or spoofed emails, right? I receive them every day. The finance team has the largest target on their back. So they are target number one and they're getting the most amount. So I think the CFO and finance teams are starting to understand that. And I think training is extremely vital, right? Because, especially these real world, role-based training scenarios where you're simulating attacks that have actually happened, right? And you're trying to duplicate, say how Facebook got hacked or Arab Engineering got hacked. And you're seeing how your system can handle it and how your team can handle it. Most importantly, because I think, even just that simple thing of leveraging ChatGPT, also the cyber criminals are leveraging their own AI tool to try to get in. So I think the more awareness you can provide within the organization, as well as training, is very, very important to keeping your business secure. I think, we need to be more proactive than reactive and take more steps to protect our business.
Anything else that you want to maybe ask our listeners to take action on or steps that they should take next after hearing about some of these critical issues?
Well, I think you should run some of these tests and simulations on your team and to see, how your process holds up when you try some of these spoofs. I think it will be pretty eye-opening to see how easy it is to get in, and that can help you to look at ways to improve. In today's day and age, there's just so many different routes that they're getting in. And so you need to continuously always be up to date with what these cyber criminals are doing and ways they are getting in. And I think the more and more that you can be testing, simulating, as well as awareness and training for your team, the better.
Yeah, Rob, let me give you the last word here.
Just a quick plug for Gabe and his team and the cybersecurity guide for CFOs that they put out. That was something I got a ton of value out of, and I actually shared it with my whole organization. And I got great feedback about it, so much to the point where we're actually doing a special session specifically on that topic for my whole organization here in a couple of weeks. I think just the education and understanding what's going on in the world, not just within, your own region, but especially if you're a multinational company, really understanding what also is occurring on other parts of the world is pretty eye-opening. But it's not just to be scary. It's to really help empower people to learn more, to protect themselves and their organizations, and to make better decisions when they're going through these really important projects as they're evolving their technology landscape.
All right. Well, it's been a great conversation. I've certainly learned a lot. It's really interesting to hear about the partnership and the direction that you're taking together. Gabe, Rob, thank you both so much for being here. This has been another episode of the MSTW podcast. My thanks once again to Rob and Gabe for joining me. And to get access to the 2025 Cybersecurity Guide for CFOs, check out the link in the show notes. And that's it for this episode. If you want to get in touch with me, you can send me an email, jason@msdynamicsworld.com. For all of our updates, please do follow us on LinkedIn. Until next time, this is MS Dynamics World, signing off.